I remember meeting an elderly man once on a quiet evening in a small, dusty bookstore. He had the kind of face that told 1,000 stories, wrinkled, tired, but wise. His name was Mr. James, a man who had lived most of his life alone. I didn't know much about him back then, but his story still haunts me to this day. It was a rainy day, like so many others during that time of year. The bookstore, tucked in a corner of the city, smelled of old paper and forgotten memories. I was browsing through a shelf of poetry when I noticed him. He was sitting by the window, looking out at the rain with a half-empty cup of tea beside him. Curiosity pulled me towards him. I sat down at the table across from him, and after a moment of silence, I asked, "What's on your mind, Mr. James?" He turned to me, his eyes softening with recognition. "I was just thinking about my wife," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say, but I sat quietly waiting for him to continue. He told me how he and his wife Emily had been high school sweethearts. They had shared everything, dreams, hopes, and even their first rainy day together. "She always loved the rain," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. It was as if the rain washed away all our worries. It was during one of those rainy evenings when we were still young that I gave her a letter. A note written in haste, filled with promises and love. She was my world. His voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw a tear fall from his eye. "She kept that letter for years," he continued, "even after I went away for work, even after life pulled us in different directions. The last time I saw her was at the hospital just before she passed. She held that letter in her hand as if it was all that mattered." He paused, gazing at the rain outside, lost in memories. "I thought I'd be fine. I thought I'd move on, keep living," he said, his hands trembling slightly. "But life doesn't let go so easily, does it? I went through my days, visited the bookstore, and kept my routines. But every time it rained, I'd think of that note, the one I never gave her again, the one that had the last of my promises." I sat there unable to speak. His story hung in the air, thick with regret and unspoken words. "There's something I never told anyone," he said quietly, as if to himself. "Before she died, she asked me to promise her something. She said, 'If I'm not here tomorrow, promise me you'll write me one last letter. A letter that says everything we never said.'" The tears flowed freely now. Mr. James's hand shook, and he buried his face in them. "I never wrote it," he whispered. "I couldn't. She was gone, and it was too late. I never got to tell her the things I should have." The bookstore was silent, save for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. The weight of Mr. James's words hung heavy in the air, like an unanswered question. I didn't know how to comfort him, but I knew one thing. The pain of unspoken words, the weight of things left undone, was something we all carried at some point in our lives. I stood up, walked over to him, and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "Maybe," I said softly, "you can write her that letter now. Write it in your heart and let it go. She'll hear you." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "Maybe I will." I left the bookstore that day, but I couldn't forget Mr. James. His story stayed with me, a reminder that sometimes the hardest regrets are not the things we did, but the things we didn't say, especially to those we love. It's never too late to express our feelings. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because life doesn't give us endless chances. Share your love, your gratitude, and your regrets before it's too late.